Jensen will be joining us. He's currently chairing the Parks and Rec committee right now, but he's on his way. And Councillor Olson is away today. Councillor Day, I don't know, but we do have quorum. So I'd like to call the City of Colwood Special Council meeting for Thursday, January 19th, 2023 to order, 6:30. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Lekwungen speaking people. And we are honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. May I have a motion that the agenda for this evening be adopted as presented? Councillor Ward and Councillor Grove, second. All in favor? It's unanimous. And public participation. Anyone wish to speak?
I can speak really loud if you like.
It probably won't work, but if you can come on up here, it's okay.
I mostly came tonight just to see what's going on, and apparently you've got an agenda. You're going to speak about some certain things, and I want to see how that runs. That's mostly why I came here. I have no idea what you were going to talk about, but anyway, I have some things that I'm interested in having done, but apparently it's not going to be tonight, so that's okay too.
Well, I'd like to welcome you, Alfie. This is your first meeting, and it's great to see different people from the public come out to the meeting. So great. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Yes. Okay, what I'd like to do is unfinished business. I'm going to get Mr. Earl to introduce the Colliers team. This is just the discussions that we were having on the RCMP facility. Lots of questions that were asked, and we didn't have all the experts around the table. So over to you, Mr. Earl.
Thank you, Your Worship. And as you've indicated, we've got two members of Colliers project leaders with us this evening, connecting through the Zoom platform, Anne-Marie Middleton and Bonita Craig. Bonita has been acting as project leader on this project for the three communities. Based on the January 9th meeting, there was a number of questions that came up. And so Bonita is here to address the questions that we've pre-supplied, and then any others that may come up this evening. We've included in your agenda this evening the two appendices that were attached to the January 9th meeting, just for your reference. There'll be no specific presentation on those. Those were here for your information. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bonita.
Just before we start, I forgot to mention that there was one written submission after the agenda was published, and it will be appended to the agenda. Thank you. Over to you.
All right. Great, thank you. Thanks for having me. And apologies I couldn't be there in person today, but fortunately Zoom should serve us well. I cannot see everybody, so I will leave it to you, Mayor, to flag on behalf of the councillors in the room or the public we've got if there are questions as I go through. I know Robert shared with council earlier this month the work that we've been doing with Colwood, Langford, and View Royal over the past almost 2 years now. And council's had a bit more time to digest and has kindly come back with a number of questions. So happy to be here today to answer any more that emerge and come about, and really just have a Q&A so that you have a level of comfort and understanding with the work that's been done, and in any other way that we can help today. So I will share my screen as Robert has kindly passed on the questions that came through following his presentation. Alrighty. So some of the questions that arose were around capacity, location, some specific things like jail cells, parking, land acquisition assumptions, lease space, and we've seen all of those questions and we'll answer them as we walk through some of the material here. Again, please feel free to interject as I go through. Before we dive into some of the specific answers, we just wanted to recap on the work that has been done in working with the 3 communities. The exercise around exploring a new RCMP detachment actually started with some work led directly by the RCMP themselves dating back to 2019 when they started to work with their provincial leads who support the development of expansion or new RCMP detachments to shape a space analysis to get a sense of what they would need in the future, because as far back as 2019, they were feeling the strain of their current space. They then went on to do some preliminary site survey concepts for where the building currently is and get a sense of the land around them and the condition of their buildings. They, in November of 2020, commissioned some concept sketches around what a redevelopment could look like. And at that point in time, the 3 communities that ultimately own and pay for the facility that house the RCMP services, Colwood, View Royal, and Langford, commissioned a more formal study to look at what was required here, the nature of the problem, and what options there might be to meet those requirements for RCMP services. So that work progressed over about a year. It was presented in a few different forums with a steering committee that was made up of the CAOs from each of those communities, as well as the RCMP. And most recently, in March of 2022, those were the findings of that study, or a feasibility study options analysis, was shared with the mayors at that time. In May of last year, that progressed to then looking at the delivery methods you could use for some of the options presented. And in September 2022, there was a presentation on how you would proceed with a project plan for a preferred delivery method. Of course, we had the election in the fall, and it was pretty critical that the new councillors and elected officials across all 3 communities be brought up to speed on the work that's been done to date. And so in December, the CAOs asked that we provide an overview of the work to date to the new mayors and councils. And this is very much part of that, bringing everybody up to speed, answering questions, exploring other areas if the group feels there's more that needs to be explored. So that's in a page what we've been doing so far. Now, the biggest question that was evident that came through from council was, how was the determination made to rebuild? And I think the best way to help answer that is to bring you back to the 2 problems that were framed up to us when we first started working with the steering committee. And those 2 problems were that the existing facility was reaching and at capacity, and that nearly 1/3 of it was deemed to be at the end of its life. I say those 2 things, and there were questions about those two statements of the problem at the outset. So there's a question, who determines that the existing building is at capacity? Well, ultimately, that determination is by the RCMP, the people that operate it and can make an assessment of how well it's working for their operational requirements. But from a Colliers perspective and an understanding of having delivered a number of RCMP detachments throughout the province and supported in planning stages for facilities just like this, we were able to do a bit of a benchmarking exercise. And if you look at the numbers on this page here, highlighted on the bottom, we compared both West Shore currently, the 2022 number, that 252 is the square footage per total FTE, or person that's working in that building. And if we compare that to Kelowna, which is a detachment that was completed in about 2017, and their 2021 headcount numbers, as in how they're operating in there now, they're at about 338 square feet per person working in the building. We did some other comparisons too that I haven't shown directly here, including the city of Burnaby, who is currently in the planning stages of a new major detachment. Prince Rupert, same thing, they're a little bit further ahead in the process, and they're both operating and planning in the range of about 300 to 315 square foot per FTE. Now, there's lots of variables that can affect where you end up landing in that range, the nature of services a detachment is providing, the site that you're planning on, but as an indicator, from our perspective, it gave a sense that the statement of being at capacity, there's some legitimacy to it as we compare to what we knew to be the case for other facilities. So the second part of the problem statement that we were presented with is the idea of part of the building and where they're currently operating from being at end of life. So you can see in this plan here, there's two components of the existing detachment. Part that was built sometime in the 1960s and the part that was built in and around 1999. And the 1999 building goes up a few more stories than the 1960s building. So there's more square footage in that. It makes up about 2/3 of the current facility. And the 1960s part of it makes up about 1/3 of it. And because it was built in the 1960s, that puts it at close to what we would consider typically to be end of life. A typical building of that type has a lifespan of about 60 years. That doesn't mean that you then just, your only choice is to demolish it. Of course, there's always the option to make significant investments in life extending measures. The work that can be done to investigate what exactly those would be and how much life they could get out of a building is usually identified in a building condition assessment. They're not cheap pieces of work, anywhere between $20,000 to $30,000. And that given an indication of the quality and condition of some of the core infrastructure in the building and how much you would need to spend to get material extension to the life of those. You would not be able to get, it would be very difficult to get life extending measures that would be on par with building an equivalent new square footage. So we've recapped in starting to try to answer the question, how did we come to the determination to recommend a rebuild? We started with the problem, again, existing facility being at capacity, nearly 1/3 of the facility being at end of life. That then led us to ask, okay, well, what does an RCMP detachment for these communities need now and in the future? And then secondly, what are the options to meet those needs? So to answer that first question, there's two things we looked at, and most of this is detailed in the work, I think, that Robert has circulated. So the first, well, how many people are going to be working here? It's the size of the force. And typically, when you talk about meeting future requirements, you are indeed planning for the future. So we looked at a number of different time horizons, and the committee concluded on the idea of planning out to 2045. From the time that a building like this would be done, at the time we were thinking 2025 completion. That might be a bit ambitious now if it were to happen. But regardless, that's more or less a 20-year planning horizon. Pretty typical for most municipal assets of this nature, kind of a very traditional planning horizon that the other detachments I alluded to earlier that we've helped with tend to plan to. But again, we looked at other different time horizons and discussed the pros and cons of each with the steering committee as well. And then we also looked at what those population projections were for those regions out to 2045, and then married that with RCMP recommended policing ratios given the size and density of each of the communities. And that spells out, in combination with the regular member force and the municipal staff that's required to support it, a total headcount that the facility needs to accommodate. Beyond that, the exercise of, okay, well, how much space do they need and what kind of spaces is very much an RCMP-driven exercise. It's a highly, highly standardized program of spaces and types according to the number of members, the makeup of the region that they're serving, and the types of services they need to be equipped to provide. So coming out of that, you get a program that sets out, here's what this detachment needs, much of which already exists within the current one. But when we talk about growth, sometimes there's that sometimes means you've got to incorporate new or expanded services and functions that tend to be commonly needed in larger growing communities. So that was how we got to an understanding of the requirements. One of those requirements isn't just What you might obviously be thinking of things like jail cells and receptions and forensic rooms, but also parking. And I know some questions came up about parking. So how did we scale the parking? Well, maths here for you to take a look at. We looked at the number of regular RCMP, regular force staff, the support staff or municipal employees that support the membership, guards and cleaning staff, visitor, and then the service vehicles, so that the fleet of policing vehicles that you would be accustomed to seeing. So that's a total number of stalls, but of course, they're not all always there at the same time. So we look at what's the peak shift, because they have a pretty structured shifting program of how many people are typically working in a detachment at any one time, and that works out to about 75%. And so that 75% occupancy works out to 295 stalls, with the need for 2 additional ones for particularly large specialty service vehicles that are not included in that 91. So that's an answer to the question around, I think the question was, have we planned for parking for all staff in that building? So the answer is yes, but at 75% occupancy, which is typical for the building. So then we get on to, with a clear view of the requirements, both building-wise and parking, what are the options to meet those needs? The work you will have seen that we did looked at 2 main options: redeveloping the existing facility or building new elsewhere. The question was raised around, have we looked at leased spaces or some other similar type of option? So we've tried to outline here some of the rationale that was discussed with the steering committee to come to narrow the investigation onto only 2 of the options, that being 1 and 2 that are shown there. So as I mentioned to you earlier, redeveloping the existing seemed like a logical thing to explore, given that 2/3 of the space they're currently in is not at end of life, and moreover has recently had an investment. The whole second floor was recently renovated, the office spaces in there. So it's still working well and has merit and value to the RCMP that are operating there and to the owners of the building. Build new elsewhere was raised because, well, no one's naive to the fact that often redevelopments can be expensive and things can go wrong. And we wanted to explore the trade-offs of whether there might be any operational or financial benefit to disposing of the current facility and just building something beautiful and brand new in a new location, and whether there'd be any real material benefit to that. The third option that I've just shown here that we did not explore, to be clear, but I know someone had asked the question about it, is leasing. So RCMP detachment uses are highly specialized, and for predominantly security and the nature of the construction and customization work that is required to meet RCMP codes and standards renders leasing more or less impossible. I won't go so far as to say completely impossible. I've seen crazier things, but not something that there'd be support for the RCMP from security and operational reasons. Moreover, we can speak from kind of a real estate perspective that the financial stakeholders and the taxpayers that ultimately benefit from the RCMP services, there's a real investment risk if you fit out a space to meet RCMP requirements and for some reason a lease term isn't fulfilled. There's no way to recoup the elaborate construction and fit out features that would be required in a lease space and then drop them into a new lease space. So short answer, no, we did not explore leases. Doesn't mean there couldn't be a more detailed and thoughtful exercise to explore that, though. Okay. So one of the other questions that was asked around options is what are the options to meet the parking requirements? And in both of the 2 options that we did look at, so redevelop and build new, in both those options, we looked at a variety of parking solutions. Surface parking, parking structure, underground parking, rooftop parking was a question that someone had raised. In both options, we found that any non-surface parking solution, so whether you go underground, whether you build on top of a roof, or whether you build think of a parking garage kind of structure, all of those solutions are generally cost prohibitive in that land market when you compare it against the cost of land. That is to say, it's cheaper to buy more land and do surface parking than it is to build a parking structure. They're extremely expensive. There are also some material geological conditions in the redeveloped scenario that would limit your ability to go down for that particular option. On the rooftop parking question specifically, that we tend to see that application most often in really high density urban areas where that is not the case. The value of land is so exorbitant that you're driven to do crazy things like have car elevators to find space for your vehicles in Langford. And that particular site is certainly not there yet. Furthermore, they're really inefficient with how much parking you actually get, because at the end of the day, you still need a way to kind of get to the roof of that parking garage, which takes square footage. You can only have ramps at a certain grade. So it is a great idea, but much like that kind of underground or parking structure solutions is cost prohibitive in this context. Doesn't mean you couldn't go and build a parking structure. It just costs more than buying more land. So recapping again, existing facility at capacity, a third of it's at end of life. I've walked you through how we came to understand RCMP future needs and the options. I'm going to talk a little bit more now about how we detailed those options, because we conceptually agreed those are the two buckets we're going to explore, but what does that actually look like? So in the first option, to redevelop the existing site, this is a very, very conceptual working plan that you're looking at here, but something that kind of blocks out an idea of how a site could work if you redeveloped the existing. But the general premise is you demolish the 1960s building, which is here, if you recall in the earlier slide I showed, and you build a net new footprint as a bit of a tower on top of that. You would need to incorporate this land. If you visited the site, there's a perimeter fence around, I believe it's right about this line, the existing property that closes in where all the secure parking is for their service vehicles. But the future parking requirements that we talked about earlier would require more parking than what is currently on the site. And the solution that we discussed to that is acquiring the adjacent land to it. And the city of Langford, on their own volition, has done that. So that land, not all of it, but a couple of properties there Langford has acquired, which could serve the needs of this project. They could not. It's Langford's land to decide how and when it's used, but it certainly renders that a viable solution to the parking piece. We would, of course, retain the existing 1999 facility, but it's recognized that it's not as simple as just keep it as it is and build a whole new tower and everything's hunky-dory operationally for the RCMP. So we did account for about a 25% redevelopment of the 1999 facility. That is, there's going to be what we would call restacking or movement and shuffling of some of the administrative or upper level functions between the two buildings so that the groups that need to work together are together and the right kinds of spaces are being used in the right way. The second option of build new, we did a market search based on the land requirements of about 2.9 acres to see what we could find in I'll say loose, the firm blue line that you see on this slide is more rigid than we actually took as we went to the market. You can see there's a couple of options that came out at the time we did this assessment outside of that radius, but we used it as a kind of anchor point of we want to be within this kind of zonal area. The other point from the RCMP perspective around location was the merits of proximity to Highway 1. At this stage, for identifying whether there was even any land that met the size requirements was of greater significance than proximity to Highway 1. That was truly a determining factor for how much land that was needed. I will make an acknowledgement back to the discussion around parking, that yes, you could find land with less land, but then you're forced to do some sort of structural parking, and that drives costs up dramatically, disproportionate to the cost and value of land. So as a kind of anchoring assumption, we were looking to acquire land, build new, and that would be surface parking. 3 options were identified at that point in time. They were a combination of direct listings and what brokers knew to be available or developers knew to be available, potential interest to sell. There were no municipally owned, either by one of the 3 municipalities, land options that were tabled as part of that exercise that would meet the land area at first. Certainly is the first kind of requirement, that the land area requirements, and secondly, within that desired more or less radius. I'm sure, I don't doubt for a second, this was probably 12, 18 months ago when we did this. There's more different land that might be available now. The purpose of the exercise at that point in time was, might there be something, and what would it cost? And we'll talk more about the cost analysis we did, but absolutely, you could go back to the market now and look and see what might be available and out there now. Something new might have come to light. I don't think there's been any huge changes in land valuations in the area, but again, we all know that real estate and land values do fluctuate significantly, so it's by no means a decisive exercise. There were questions while we talk about those 2 options, and particularly in option 1, the idea of redeveloping the existing. There was a question about where the jail cells would be. They would be retained. They're currently in the lower level of this 1999 facility, and they would be kept there. The number of cells that are currently in there would be sufficient even with future growth. So they'd stay as they are. There might be some minor refurbishment as part of that 25% refurbishment I described, but the actual location would be unlikely to change. So we looked at the 2 options, and then we did a financial analysis of the 2. You'll see in these capital cost numbers, they're based on a benchmarking of construction cost pricing against other recent RCMP builds in the province. There are 2 questions that came out from council related to what you're looking at here on the capital cost estimations. First is around the land acquisition, and why are those 2 numbers different? So in option 1, the land acquisition is for approximately 0.6 acres. And that's the land that I showed you earlier that would be required to provide sufficient surface parking in the redeveloped scenario. Whereas in option 2, that 9 million is reflective of acquiring just under 3 acres. So it's a material difference in the amount of land you're talking about. The pricing that was used for acquiring just under 3 acres was based on market valuations of land in the area. The number for the 5.4 was based on real negotiated prices that were ongoing between Langford and the properties they were acquiring in that area at the time the study was going on. So it was a little bit more real-time estimation. And that total is actually larger than I think what they ended up paying in the end for the 4 that they had acquired. The next question was about proceeds of sales. Trying to, if any of you have sold a house, know that guessing what you'll get for it is just that, often a bit of a guess. A little bit less of a guess in institutional and commercial real estate. However, that number was based on consultation with our colleagues in brokerage who buy and sell these types of assets on behalf of public sector entities and in the private market across the Lower Mainland and in the island. The 2.7 also factored in it was reflective of land value in the area, and also acknowledges the fact that an RCMP detachment is not an easily repurposed asset. And it's quite likely that we're talking land value only, and there's going to be a cost either to buyer or seller of either decommissioning and demolishing what's there. And that is affected and reflected within that estimate. Again, that can be updated, revisited with a whole other series of kind of cost comparables benchmark. It could even go so far as to actually consult and engage with potential developers or users in the region to get a sense of what they might think it is worth. Capital cost is not the only thing we looked at, because if anybody has bought an older home, you know that older things tend to cost more money to maintain. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't keep the analysis simple and say that, well, this one is more or less expensive to build. We wanted to look at what would be the cost to own this over the life of those two options. So an example of where you might see some differences between old and new, or in this case, new and then a mix of old and new, is things like the utility costs, or something we call capital reserves, how much money you need to and you should be putting away on a monthly basis or annual basis to cover the cost of major repairs. If it's an older asset, that tends to be a larger number. If it's a younger asset, it doesn't need to be quite so high. And as an asset ages, you need to be building larger capital reserves to be able to afford those major reinvestments and continue to extend the life of the building. This model that we did, this whole life cost model, is based on dozens of assumptions based on our experience, industry heuristics. It's by no means, though, a perfect crystal ball. We do try to bring in sensitivity testing on a number of the assumptions. So we sort of say, well, if it wasn't this, but it was 10% greater or 10% less, what does that do to the findings? And in general, and having tested kind of the variables that we felt and saw were having the largest impact on the overall whole life cost, when we tested those within reasonable ranges, so generally 10 to 15%, they didn't have a material effect on the outcome finding, which you will have seen in the report that on a whole life cost basis, redevelopment of the existing building is a bit less than the costs you incur over building new and operating new over that lifespan. It's worth noting that the whole life cost modeling exercise did incorporate spending to continue to extend the age of the 1999 facility. Because as I alluded to earlier, we're talking about comparing a brand new building to a combination of buildings where some of it would be brand new when built, and then the other part of it is maybe 40% of the way through its life. So how do we financially reconcile for that difference? And so we did that in two ways, both in terms of operating costs and capital reserves, but also an investment in the seismic upgrading that would be required. Not extensive, but enough to materially extend the life of the 1999 facility and give our best indication of how those were performed to get them so that you're comparing as much as we could apples to apples. As you can see, there was no whole life cost benefit, given the assumptions that we made, to build new. Now, of course, any of the assumptions that we built into there, you could test, you could plug in a whole different series of high and low bars. It is a model, and virtually every part of it can be changed if needed. The idea, though, of determining or making a recommendation to rebuild isn't strictly a financial decision. You know, I described at the beginning that it's pretty critical to consider the emergency services that the RCMP provide. And that's certainly not our domain, but the RCMP made it very clear that the current location, being central with easy access to Highway 1 and all the communities they're responsible for serving, was hands down a preferred location to any of the other ones that we identified at the time of the study. And that is how, to the question of how was the determination made to rebuild, the steering committee came to that recommendation of redeveloping on the existing site, given that it had both a lower capital cost, a significantly lower capital cost, and slightly lower whole life cost, as well as the really important operational consideration of the RCMP are working well where they are now, and there's strong preference to continue to work out of that location. So I'm hoping that I've covered. We did a pretty extensive listing of the questions, and I think I weaved the answers into most of that. I will pause and put it over to you, Mayor and Council, should there be questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Bonita. You covered the questions very well, but I will open it up to the councillors right now. There's some other additional questions. So Councillor Jordison, if you'd like to start it off.
I almost feel bad asking this question, but I guess to hear, when I first heard about this and to hear that this negotiations or finding information seeking has been happening since 2019 and nobody knows about it. The public doesn't know about it. Council didn't know about it, and the same with the other municipalities, and it was the mayor and CAOs. I don't think something of this magnitude should be something that should be discussed behind closed doors. And what I find concerning about it is I have searched high and low to try and find an RFP notice and award for Colliers to do this work. And this isn't something that you can really address. And so I apologize for that, but I believe that this should have been an award that, was done through an open and transparent, fair and accountable process. And I'm not sure that that's been done. So it kind of upsets the whole thing, because I don't understand how we got to the point we're at right now. And so are you able, is Colliers able to say that they bid on a proposal?
Did you want to answer this, Robert, or did you want me to?
Your worship, if I may.
Please, Mr. Earl.
Langford acts as a fiscal agent for the three communities when it comes to the West Shore detachment for kind of traditional annual operating items. And for this specific item, when we sought to engage a firm, Colliers came to the community's attention when we reached out to the city of Kelowna. Kelowna had, as already described, built a detachment in the mid, I think 2015, 2016, 2017, in that range. And they did so quite cost effectively when we looked at their cost per square foot as constructed when compared to others. And so we reached out to the city of Kelowna to seek kind of best practices as to how they achieved that. They indicated that they had used Colliers project leaders to help them along that path. We then reached out to Colliers, met with them, had some discussions, and we sought a proposal from them. They responded to that. The specifics as to how that engagement occurred, I can't answer. Those occurred through Langford. I can reach out and get them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Earl. Please continue.
Yeah, so further to that. So the answer is no. The answer is no, that this was not done through a fair, transparent, accountable process. And as a new council, I believe that that is one of the biggest things that we all ran on in the election, is that we want to be transparent and fair in our processes. And I think every local government, and I'd like to think ones that we're working with in partnership on such huge financial considerations, that we're working with people that have the same principles as we do. And so I just have a concern about that. I don't know what that does, but I don't feel that. I'm not saying that Colliers wouldn't be the best people to do the work. I'm just saying that we don't know that. And we don't know if we're getting best bang for our buck. We don't know if we have an obligation to the people that live in Colwood. And so that's a big concern of mine. Also, I still haven't been able to figure out who owns the land that the RCMP building sits on. And I'm not sure if Colliers can answer that. I know Robert answered it kind of by saying that we're on title for 35% of the land, but what does that mean? Did the city of Colwood give money to Langford for part of the land, or do we pay for that annually? Like, that's another question.
Your worship, if I may.
Please, Mr.
The three communities collectively own the land upon which the detachment exists. We own different proportionate shares. It appears the proportionate shares were likely calculated in 1999 based on 50% value of assessments and 50% population. That's my estimate as to how the distribution of ownership on that land was established. I could dig into the history. I can tell you, Colwood is an owner of 35% of that land.
Okay. It's and I'm probably the creator of the issues here too, because when I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, they told us the land that we were on was Langford land. And we went, okay, that's great, because when the chamber was in a lot of trouble 10 years ago and we tried to get ourselves out of it, we tried to leverage the value of the land to get us out of the trouble we were in, only to find out because Langford told us that they owned the land. So when we went through the whole legal mumbo jumbo and we got all the lawyers involved, we found out in actual fact, the actual owners of the land was the province. And they basically had some kind of agreement that was signed, and Langford owned it, but it really didn't own it. And therefore we couldn't leverage the land. It was a funny situation. And I guess part of my question is I just wanted to confirm that in fact, it is our land, like it is our land. It's not the province's underlying, it's not the province's land.
We're on title at
Okay.
Land Title's office.
Okay.
We're a 35% share of the land. I'm not sure if that gives you the confidence that you need. I can pull the title and provide it if required.
Okay, thank you very much. So I believe Langford was on title for the land the Chamber of Commerce was on. That's all I kind of remember. But when they dug into it all and got the legal beagles in it, that's when they found out, in fact, they're on title, but it was different. And I don't know all the details, but all I know is that we couldn't leverage it. Anyways, please proceed.
Hey, sorry, and my
Councillor
last
Joseph.
question or concern, I guess, I understand that purchasing the residents, the properties that are in the back or side of the RCMP detachment is something that's needed to expand this. But this plan hasn't been endorsed. So, and I also understand that Langford has a greater population that the RCMP serves and in relation to the rest of us, but this is a partnership. So why is Langford purchasing properties to push this forward when it hasn't been endorsed by everybody? That it just concerns me. This isn't a partnership that I would personally be involved in, like personally, because it doesn't seem like it's a partnership that's it's not being handled properly. You need to consult everybody. I mean, there's a lot of money involved in purchasing the properties that have been already purchased. So I know that's something else you can't answer. So I'm not sure if having Todd Preston attend to answer some of these questions will help next week. But I still think that it's maybe the CAOs that were involved in this, if they're still all part, should be able to answer more of the questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Bonita, for the presentation. If I just go back to the timeline, I had noted that the project really kind of kicked off, at least according to what we've been shown, with the RCMP kind of doing a self-assessment. And it looked to me that the first step there, or next step there, really became looking at redeveloping on the current site. So it seems like we've kind of come full circle. They've established that at the outset that that was what they wanted to do. And then through the process, I guess this is where some of the cynicism or concern comes in for me, is just that, okay, we've decided this is what we want to do. So we'll go out and in a closed door process, find an organization that can effectively deliver the vision that we want. And I don't fault you for that, to be quite clear, but I think at the end of the day, when it's done behind closed doors, as Councillor Jordison alluded to, by three mayors who, none of whom hold a seat at the table anymore, the public certainly has a right to ask some questions. So for me, the timeline's a little concerning in that the parameters maybe that you were given really created a roadmap to come to this decision and really didn't leave room for other options. So secondly, and I'm not going to ask you to answer that, I think that's a bit of a leading question or a loaded question for you, but it certainly speaks to my concerns about the process. I wondered who was on the 2022 steering committee, if you have that information.
Yeah, the steering committee was made up of the mayors, it was made up of the CAOs of each of the municipalities and the Inspector Preston. I will comment to your observation. We don't write reports to tell our clients what they want it to say. We've got professional integrity that would not produce results that would lead us to disguise what we genuinely believe. You know what, I shared with you the financial findings. We're not in a position to comment on what works or doesn't work operationally for the RCMP, but on a financial basis, there's nothing in there that I wouldn't hold up to the utmost scrutiny in terms of the conclusions that we came to.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm not questioning your integrity by any means. I think, again, when you're given a certain framework to work within, that's the information you have to work within. So that sort of segues to my next question, I guess, which is, you know, the surface parking requirements really dictate the scope of the project in terms of the parcel of land that's required, and obviously limits it significantly. You answered my question, obviously, around the viability of non-surface parking, you know, underground parking and things like that. But I guess I go back to the parking list and I see, you know, a total of 113 stalls required for operational activities, 91 service vehicles, 17 visitor, 5 for guards and cleaning staff. That versus the 297 total. So even if we add a buffer on top of that, that's a significant difference. You know, it's well more than double. And I wonder if at any point in the process, anybody, any of the mayors, anybody of the people representing the taxpayer chose to go back and say, maybe it doesn't make sense to provide complimentary parking to, you know, over 100 vehicles here. So I'd ask you, you know, just purely from the analytical perspective, if you were to carve that out, you know, would that potentially open up more options?
It might, yeah. If you said we weren't going to provide any parking for RCMP staff and municipal staff, it would correspond to a smaller land requirement, and invariably, I don't know exactly top of mind what that number would be. We can do that analysis to then say, okay, well, maybe that would bring to the surface a handful of other land options. You know, Inspector Preston isn't in the room, but I can tell you from the number of detachments we have done, at minimum for the regular member contingent of the people that are working in that building, there would be a tooth and nail fight around the provision of parking. They find it very difficult to retain staff if that's not part of the employment benefits.
You know, certainly I can understand that. I guess my other question then would be, if it's just availability of parking, was any thought given to a fee parking, or, you know, a pay parkade or pay surface parking? I know personally the organization I work for, and many others, including government and private sector, for example, who go into downtown Victoria, parking is a perk if you get it at all. And it's not included in most employment packages. So I'm a little taken aback by Superintendent Preston's, you know, thoughts here that this is a a necessary requirement for employment. But going back to the question, was there any thought given to the the offset of paid parking?
So Inspector Preston did not say that. I'm speaking from the experience we've had delivering a number of these detachments where this very question is raised. How can we reduce an overall parking requirement? And the RCMP as an organization generally hold that view of the obligation to provide parking for their regular members. That is not, there are some municipalities that are contemplating and exploring the option of not providing the gift of parking to the municipal staff that support the operations, just from kind of what we've seen. We did not discuss the model of paid parking. That is a revenue generating opportunity that would simply serve to offset the costs. You'd have to do some pretty complex, and it's totally doable, modeling of how a paid parking model or system might affect demand to then see if we implemented paid parking, we think it would lead to a reduction in people driving to work of 10%. Therefore, we can build 10% fewer stalls. You'd start to want to do a bit of a demographic analysis and kind of modal and commute patterns to get a level of confidence in what you still need to build.
Sure.
Does that answer your question?
I know that was great, Bonita. Thank you. I know I'm inching close to my time limit here. Was there any concern or thought given to what could potentially happen to the parking that currently is in the Island Rail Corridor lands there and the decision-making process that we know is coming there in a matter of months potentially?
Yes. So in fact, if you were specifically honed in on the parking details, you'll notice that part of the redeveloped solution includes actually extending that lease agreement. And Langford, on behalf of the communities, did have an exploratory conversation with the landowner to confirm that there'd be availability and interest on a long-term lease model to do that, and that there'd be, to what you're referring to, this came up in the discussion with the mayors in December, no risk to that assumption.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Day.
Thank you. So I'm assuming that there was a professional assessment done of the building, including the 1960 portion and the 1999 portion?
When you say assessment of what?
Of the building. So when you were giving your talk earlier tonight, you said that older buildings do have higher costs and higher needs for maintenance.
Yes.
And that when you had an older building, you would address that by having an assessment.
A building condition assessment. Yes, I did mention that. We did not conduct a building condition assessment. That absolutely can be done to map out what those costs look like to extend the life of the 1960s building.
So I find that kind of concerning. I was thinking that it had been done but not shared with us. But without a professional assessment done of the building, how do we arrive at the conclusion that it is at the end of its useful life?
In my professional experience as a mechanical engineer, and having worked with a number of municipal assets like this, I've never come across a building that is 60 years old that doesn't fall into the category of end of life, lest there be significant investment in its core infrastructure. That doesn't mean that you cannot do a building condition assessment to find out for that specific building what that would look like.
Okay. And what is the anticipated lifespan of the 1999 portion of the building then?
You typically project out 60 years from when it was built, so from there.
Okay. So my personal opinion is that we need to be building buildings that last longer than that. What is the lifespan of the RCMP building in Kelowna then?
Any building is generally I mean, I like to think that the construction industry is delivering products now that have longer lifespans, but generally when you get to 60 years, we say end of life. That doesn't mean that every building that's 60 years old falls down or is demolished. It's just a point in time in its condition where you have to spend significant money to extend its life. More often than not for reasons due to building code, particularly in BC, given the changes to the post-disaster and seismic requirements. So the Kelowna one would have been built to the building code at the year that it was built in 2017, and they will hope that it lasts 60 years, and which point in time they evaluate their needs and requirements then.
Okay, thank you. And you also mentioned that the RCMP has standardized space requirements and that they weren't done by Colliers. So those apply across Canada to RCMP?
Correct. We do a review and validation, and we challenge them sometimes because, you know, to Robert's point, we've done a number of these, and you can still adhere to the standards and be efficient in how space is built and designed. That said, there are minimum standards and requirements that you cannot change.
Okay. And on the RCMP providing parking for their staff members, do all RCMP buildings in Canada provide parking?
I can't answer that question. That would be one for the, I don't even know if Todd could answer that, but maybe if we get that to him in advance, we'll have him answer it.
Okay. And since you don't have a professional assessment of the building, how did you arrive at the figure of 25% of the 1999 building needing to be rebuilt?
Based on the age of it and the amount of capital investments. So what we did look at is the amount of money that the municipalities have been putting into that building and the nature of work that they've been doing on it over the past, I think we had the past 5 to 10 years of data to get a sense of what types of components have you recently replaced. And there were some major ones in there. So some of the more expensive stuff. Again, if you think of a house analogy, you know, if you just replace the roof and the mechanical, you're in far better shape. So we looked at those to give an indication of what sort of percentage would be realistic for having to refurbish in order to make it workable alongside a new construction.
Okay. And you didn't provide any of that data to us. Is there a reason for that?
The CAOs have the financial model with the disclaimer that from us that if it gets modified or changed at all, we can't speak to its outputs, but that financial model includes all of those assumptions.
Right. So you have a financial model that's predicting 25% rebuild on a building that's 20 years old.
No, the model does not predict 25%. That was a heuristic judgment based on the investments it was a judgment call we made based on what we've seen spent on it and the nature of programming that's in it to give a sense of how much of that is likely going to need to be redone at the time of a redevelopment to make this work.
Okay. But I'm still not understanding why that determination has not been shared.
We can share the data that determination was made on, if that's what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. So that is the how much the operating budget of the facility that I think we got from the CFO in Langford. So that I'm sure you have ready access to as is, I would think, or can be provided.
Thank you. Councillor Jensen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. An interesting discussion. Just quickly, I think I got it, but your $80 million figure for the redevelopment and the projections out to end of life, did that figure then include the remediation of the newer portion of the building? Presumably that remediation would have to kick off 20, 30 years sooner than the portion we're talking about rebuilding?
It includes, so we took 25 to the question from the previous counselor, 25% of the square footage. So it includes, assume we refit 25% of that square footage at X cost per square foot. It also included a lump sum amount of seismic upgrades of about 6 million. Again, that's just based on heuristics, conversations we've had with others that have tried to do similar, where you get two buildings coming together, old and new, ballpark structurally, what does that cost?
Okay, I got it. So that 25% includes the future remediation of the newer half of the building and the upgrading for the seismic.
So in the capital cost assumptions, there's the amount of the 25% is included in the building construction number that you see. So the 44 million, why don't I share my screen quickly? So this 44 million here has two components to it. New construction of the new tower part, redevelopment of the 1999 facility, of which we assume 25% of that would be done. And then, a third component, the 6 million seismic upgrading. So those are the three things that were included in the capital cost. We also factored in the whole life cost, that is what it would cost to operate this mix of old and new building. We assumed certain increases to the operating cost requirements of the 1999 facility as compared to a new facility. So greater rates of capital reserve contributions, higher utility costs.
Is this, does these figures include a complete remediation of all the building systems? Like, is that all new systems on both sides of the building?
So when you say, we're talking strictly the 1999 facility.
I just know that with my arts degree, not my engineering degree.
That's okay.
Once a building hits end of life with the systems as in HVAC and stuff like that, it becomes cost prohibitive to replace.
Yes.
That baked into these numbers in the sense that are we replacing the HVAC for the newer portion and the brand new portion?
Well, you're getting new with the brand new, yes. And for the 1999 facility, when I talk about larger rates of capital reserves, it's the pot of money you put away for when your boiler conks out, which we know is going to happen sooner in the 1999 proportion. Significantly higher rates of capital reserves. So that's what we assume for the 1999. So that, if everything opened in 2030, imagine, with a mix of the new building, but then you've got your kind of 20, 30-year-old 1999, 10 years down the road, there's money to pay, or we factored in the cost of paying for new fire suppression system or new air conditioning, whatever it might be.
I got it. Thank you. Interesting discussion around parking, and I made a couple of notes here. I'm aware of a union that has parking in their contract. So that's something we would need clarity on from the superintendent because that's a multi-union shop, both federal and local unions. And my personal experience around the province is that parking as a visitor is provided, and also for staff members at these detachments that I've been to. So Green Timbers, which is the new RCMP headquarters, they built to a very high standard, LEED standard. It's a wonderful building, but they shortchanged the parking, and it's created some extreme challenges at headquarters to the point where it is a factor in employment. People can move their job to easily from the headquarters building out to an outlying detachment. And it has caused a migration of staff members because of the parking pressures there. So it is something to make sure that we get right. I take all your points. What's the right number? I don't know. We'll probably have to rely on someone to advise us, but it would be unusual not to have parking for staff members, or at least a plan for parking for staff members nearby to headquarters. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jensen. I'm going to let Councillor Grove go before you, Councillor Jordison. It is his first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand this would be considered a Class D estimate. Is that right?
Correct.
So then I also am learning that this means 25 to 30% potential swing. Is that 25% more possible, 25% less possible, like 12.5% more, 12.5%?
No, it's plus or minus.
Thank you.
We've been saying plus or minus 25%.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So we could be looking at a much more expensive thing, and then there seems to be some timing pressure because of the past 5-6 years of incredibly rapid real estate increased costs and building costs, that this will somehow perhaps continue. Of course, we don't know. Maybe it'll fall by 25% over the next 3 years before you dig a hole in the ground. Yeah, we cross our fingers, so it's a bit of a crapshoot. But I just wanted to clarify that for my own mind so that I understand we're actually talking about potentially $100 million project or even more. And of course, this has happened around town, a couple of items that started and doubled before they were complete. So I just wanted to get that straight in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jordison?
I just had a question about I think it was projected that there would be 120 leased stalls. Is that correct? Along the,
That sounds right. Let me double check. Along the railway corridor there. Yes, let me double check.
so, and that was with, through the Island Corridor Foundation. So, and you stated that you didn't think that there would be any risk with that?
Low risk, and that's through the people that have been having direct conversations with the landowner. That's what was reported to us.
So have you had conversations with the First Nations groups?
We have not, no.
So at the end of March, the determination of whether it moves from ICF over to the First Nations happens at the end of March. So if the First Nation, if it goes, the land goes to the First Nations, we could potentially have 120 spots or stalls that we no longer have. So then back to Councillor Jansen's statement, we're going to have people that don't want to work at the RCMP detachment because they don't have parking. So I don't, I think that is a concern. I think that is a risk that we need to think about. And I guess I just want to address the parking issue because I've worked for government most of my life and now Island Health, and doctors and nurses are very, they're emergency personnel as well, and not one of them doesn't pay for parking. So I don't think it's a deterrent to whether they come to work each day or not. I think it's an expectation that you can't provide parking, you can't build parking and then not expect people to pay for it or taxpayers to pay for it. So anyway, thank you.
Councillor Jansen?
Sorry, I did forget one thing quickly, Your Worship. It did come up here during the discussion, and specifically this is for staff. I mean, I recall discussing this, and I don't remember if that was in camera or at the table, but can we get some feedback on whether this has come to council in some form or another in the last few years? Because I do remember talking about it.
Please, Mr. Earl.
Through to Councillor Jensen, at the budget meeting a year ago, we put onto Colwood Council's radar the scale of this project. The budget meeting the year before that, we had a discussion with council about that this project was coming. And so 2 years ago, warning it's coming. A year ago, here's the financial scale of the project. And through 22, the mayors were actively involved in the conversation.
Yeah, was there ever a motion that, and I mean, I do remember some of your reports, and I recall that the chief administrators of the 3 communities were assigned to spearhead this, or at least get the ball rolling. Was that by way of motion, or did that just happen because it was convenient or expedient?
My entry into the conversation was a result of a request from the RCMP.
From
the RCMP.
The RCMP. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, never ending here. Councillor Ward.
I just actually was just saying we need to be respectful of the time of the Colliers folks. Some of the conversations we're having now would be really best suited for when we debate the motion before us at the next meeting. But I had to address Councillor Jansen's comment around parking just because it's fun to do so. The only time the RCMP have actually brought forward a challenge around parking was in 2020 in Victoria and Whistler, and actually the National Police Federation lost that case. And the parking spaces were reduced as it was not seen as a condition of employment. So I had to throw that on the table. Forgive me.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ward. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just have one last question, which is based on, that this is an estimate and it's plus or minus 25%. Does that not make it about equal almost, whether you build a new site or go with the existing site?
No, because you would assume that your whatever margin of error you have is going to apply equally. So if one part of it increases 25%, then it's going to have the same effect on, it's going to have the equal effect. Your accuracy is equally effective on both options. So if one goes up 10%, the other is going to go up 10% for the same drivers. At a kind of philosophical level. Could you have been wrong by one component or one assumption by 15% and another 20, and that could tip the scales dramatically? Absolutely. That's kind of the art and science, if I'm honest, of trying to make assessments around next steps and balancing how much investigation you do to come to the to the next decision.
Perfect. So last question, just from your experience working with RCMP buildings, is it a requirement generally that there be a single building, or could there be multiple sites?
I can speak to literally having this exact conversation in Burnaby, where the question was raised of perhaps broadening, for example, community policing, and they don't provide the same function. So the functions that all need to be centralized, and again, Todd could speak more to this, but the functions that tend to be, they need to all be within the same sort of hub. The things that can be in satellite operating locations aren't the same things that you find in a central detachment. So you couldn't go and say, you know what, we're going to put our whole forensic ID function in this location over here. That's the message that we get from the RCMP when that very kind of point or opportunity is raised.
Yeah, so definitely. I was just thinking in terms of post-disaster buildings and that, if we had not put all our eggs in one basket and there's a major infrastructure failure for one, you might have at least half of your capacity still available to you.
That's a great point. I think for the parking conversation and this, there's probably lots of ways we might like to try and influence how the RCMP are thinking about planning of detachments.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Grove, and I'm going to wrap it up after this.
Thank you. Yeah, one quick question. Kelowna is a new build, is that right? The entire building is brand new. Kelowna. Right. Do you? I could have looked this up. Do you have any RCMP buildings that are new structure on old as we are?
No. That was briefly contemplated in Prince Rupert, but it was going to be repurposing a different building. So using old, but repurposing it, and for lots of security and practical reasons, it didn't make sense. I think in whatever legacy context, and we had this sort of chuckling conversation of the CAOs that they found themselves in 1999 of having the 1960s building, and the solution was to build new beside it, is kind of setting the foundation for what could be a perpetuation of, do we build new or do we keep having this kind of new old combination? So it is pretty unique.
Thank you.
Okay, great. And so I just have two questions. Simple ones, I'm sure you can answer really quickly. The total land area of the existing RCMP is what right now? How many acres is that?
It is approximately,
Including the proposed parking spots also.
so the current footprint is approximately 1.35 acres.
Great.
If you're to add the additional land that we showed you in that concept of it, that's what you're talking about, including that, that's an additional about 0.6, 0.7 acres.
2 acres then. Okay.
So total acreage requirement is not dissimilar between the two scenarios of around 2.8, 2.9.
Yeah, perfect. And so I just wanted to confirm that that was the number I had here. The second question is, you do the 20-year forecast. Is that normal? The normal practice in your business? You would look out 20 years and look at the manning, everything to a 20. If it's a 60-year life, I just found something out. Buildings are like aircraft. I'm an aeronautical engineer. And you'd really hate to understand that we're flying around aircraft that shouldn't be flying. We use the term BER, beyond economical repair, but we don't have the capital. You just keep on putting the patches on. That's why I'm very careful which airlines I fly on. But it's is it normal just to take the 20-year point then, not the 30-year point or the 40-year point, or like, is that the normal practice?
This was actually a question that was probably debated. This was debated extensively with the CAOs at the outset of this. What is the appropriate planning horizon?
Right.
I would say I most consistently see, whether we're talking courthouses, recreation centers, skate parks, RCMP detachments, any kind of civic building asset like this, 20 years tends to be the comfort zone of most decision makers. Projecting beyond that, as you know, for lots of reasons, is difficult. The biggest, I'll say, political challenge that you have to building something that is intended to accommodate requirements beyond 20 years is that often starts to put you in what some might call an overbuilding category, where you're building space that you're not going to need for a really long time. And how you justify that or how you offset those costs. So we did have a lengthy debate and discussion and contemplated building something to 2050 as part of this exercise, but felt that in line certainly with what I have seen, 20 years is definitely the most consistent planning horizon. It's what Kelowna did, it is what Prince Rupert is doing, and it is what Burnaby is doing.
Hey, that's great. Just want to sum up by thanking you very much. You're very knowledgeable, I can tell you that, and your ability to work under stress, you get an A+ from me. Phenomenal, and you were extremely professional. So I just want to thank you very much for coming online tonight and answering the questions. And it was unfair because some of the questions were actually for Mr. Preston himself, but you wrangled your way around them. So thank you very much. You did a great job.
My pleasure. And if I'm honest, we work with communities like this across Canada on all these on projects just like this. So we don't like to put blinders on and only think about the real estate or the building side of it. We're not naive to the broader political, social, and economic drivers that communities have to contemplate with these kinds of projects. So it's great to hear the direct feedback and questions from the councillors. We do really appreciate it. And if you do have any other questions following on from today, concerns, ideas, reach out. Happy to give our thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much, Bonita. Have a great.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. So we'll get back onto schedule. I'll turn it back over to you for new business, service profiles, and development services. First online, Mr. Earl.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Development Services Department is responsible for processing of applications for property development, which include subdivision of land, rezoning, development permits, tree removal and replacement, signage, temporary use permits, and development variances. Coordinating the delivery of planning combined with the protection and maintenance of Colwood's natural and built environment, while ensuring the city standards and bylaws are current and adhered to in order to achieve the city's goals. Working collaboratively with engineering, community planning, building department, and other cities department other city departments, other local governments, agencies, consultants, developers, and the general community to achieve the city's development objectives as articulated in the official community plan. Alignment of statutes, policies, and bylaws of the province and the city regarding the delivery of service as it relates to the specific role of the approving officer. And recommending changes to the regulatory framework for development and championing site adaptive education and communication internally and externally at implementation stage. Expectations in this area are clear communication with the community about development applications and the development process. Align projects with the expectations of the community through the official community plan. Enable high quality building design and siting through application of official community plan design guidelines. Prioritize the natural topography, environment, and climate impacts, which we refer to as site adaptive planning in the processing of applications and developments. Encourage development that increases employment opportunities, timely processing of development applications, and support council decision-making with timely, concise, and informative reports. Administration are seeking your edits to council expectations.
Okay, thank you very much. Any edits, additions? Councillor Day?
Thank you. I'm trying to capture so when development is moving forward, we put a sign on the location. Those signs can be difficult to read and have limited information. So I'm trying to suggest that an expectation that I would like to communicate is that there are links between signs that are put up in the community with information that can be found on the city's website or some other method.
Mr. Earl?
Your worship, might administration amend the first expectation to capture that?
Perfect.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. That's great. Any others? Okay. We'll continue on, Mr. Earl.
Thank you, your worship. Staff position history and forecast. You can see the department has grown since 2019, where we had 5.5 through 7 in 22 and 23. Performance measures and key stats. You can see the total number of applications climbed significantly from 2015 through 2022. You can see on the next page a breakdown of those applications. The largest being tree permits, and then you can see where rezonings and subdivisions and development permits all fit. Rezoning processing times, you can see relatively stable in and around 150 days, slightly declining from 2020 through present. And you can see the number of applications on this same chart growing from a low of 2 in some years to a high of 17 last year. Subdivision processing, looking to average 80, 90 days with the number of applications relatively constant. Development permit processing, averaging around 100 days. Again, with the number of permits relatively stable. Development variance processing is quite variable, although the number of applications stable. And then you can see Board of Variance applications climbing over time, signed permit applications, tree permit applications. And with that, I would like to turn it to the team to talk about successes and challenges and opportunities.
Perhaps quickly before we jump into the successes, challenges, and opportunities, I am going to take an opportunity to speak to two of the comments that council had for the engineering team on Tuesday about maybe what is the involvement of the planning staff, the building department, and the engineering department through the life of a project. So maybe I can explain that process a little bit more comprehensively. So every single department, engineering, development services, and building has a file manager. And so when someone comes to the door with an inquiry at the beginning, we assign a planner, a building inspector, and an engineering technician that gets attached to that inquiry. And then when we do pre-application meetings, those key contact staff people become file managers in their respective departments. And so a file manager for the development services team would support the rezoning if a rezoning was needed. It would take that application and process an environmental development permit in advance of a subdivision application. It supports the subdivision application, and then it continues on to a form and character development permit, and then it does a review at building permit. Once there's an occupancy permit because the building is constructed, then that planner does an inspection of the landscaping, and then each building, engineering, and development services file manager has a specific task to complete at each one of these points. So the release of deposit, the engineering team is doing release and review and inspection of work that is happening outside of property line in the frontage of that parcel. The development services team and the building department are working within private property, inside the private property boundaries. The building department is focused on the building itself, and the development services team is looking at land alteration, environmental components, and working closely with qualified professionals. So we have this professional reliance model. So we have monitoring and professional reporting that guides us as to when things are going well or when we should be looking at something that may not have gone to plan. And that is through these rezoning to building permit, through these additional permits that we process throughout. At each of these permits and processes, we have a referral, an internal referral. So it's an email. So when there's a blasting permit, that signals the transition between an environmental development permit and subdivision that is moving towards site preparation and in advance of a building permit submission. And the building, the engineering department processes and receives blasting permits, but before issuing that permit, both the building department and development services department get notified. And there is an ask, are there any concerns with this site? We're about to review a blasting permit request. And so there is a lot of coordination and communication. So while we don't have a project manager for the site, there is definitely a file manager attached to this file that is continuously involved at every point of this application and how it transitions from one step to the next, to the next, to the next. So that's some context to understand how we collaboratively work on private property and the public road right away. And then if I may just quickly address the other comment about how does the staff review a rezoning application against the official community plan? Because it is correct that potentially the perception of the public that they may have a different read of the document than staff are potentially delivering at the council table. Ultimately, we bring forward an application to council, and we use every decision that council makes and the conversation that happens at the table to assess whether there's comfort level with that determination of what we think is appropriate
but is it appropriate for council? And if we get a no, then we advise an applicant better. We advise them of the feel of council and the interpretation of that policy component and guideline. Ultimately, the official community plan as it's written is not prescriptive, it's descriptive. And it has a lot of room for council to consider a good number of uses. So for instance, the hillside land use designation, you can consider an application that can go all the way from a single family to a 6-story building. And the criteria under which you could take that, the path of a single family subdivision versus a 6-story apartment building is not necessarily defined, but described as if you can achieve an environmental benefit. Whether the environmental benefit that the proponent is outlining is sufficient or satisfies council, I think that's the difficult job that you guys have. What we do for you is try to frame up how they have checked the boxes, how they have provided potentially a conservation framework, how they provided the supporting reporting to make the claim that there is an environmental enhancement and gain in this application. And then we rely on then your assessment as the representatives of the community to give us an indication as to whether this is sufficient, adequate enough, or should we continue to negotiate for better and improved. Every time an application succeeds or fails, it gives us then the feedback that we need to advise on the next application. So we feed out of that process as much as we try to inform your decision, we're also taking the conversation at council and helping us write our report better. We understand what your concerns are, and we try to refine the information that we bring you the next time with a different table with potentially more data as we see the different interests and lines of inquiry that emerge. So I will end there and be happy to answer any questions.
That's a great explanation, actually, Yasmin. But Councillor Day has a question here for you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for trying to articulate kind of the relationship between planning and engineering. But is there some place that is written down? Because that's a lot to hold in our head as you're describing it. So it's something that, at least for myself, it would be much easier for me to revisit that and think about it. Is it written somewhere?
Yeah, fair enough. And I think a lot of the exploration of our relationship has happened through this Tempest module and transferring our systems that are so paper-based and creating data management and a process management software has really helped us define these relationships more clearly. So we have it written as a process flow for individual processes, but I'd be happy to provide you kind of the higher level view of how these processes interact and where the approving officer is and kind of where each player enters.
I think that would be helpful because as wonderful as it is to have you describe it, you know, it takes time to absorb all of that and be able to rethink about it later. So that would be very helpful in us being able to understand or offer potential input on what's working or not working.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yasmin, thank you. This is a subject of particular interest to me, and I really appreciate you articulating the relationship between how staff interprets the OCP and council perspective on how they interpret the OCP and what that means. And I suspect for everybody out there every 4 years, it's got to be a bit of a trial and error to try to understand, okay, what is the overarching sentiment from this side of the table so that you can apply that. And I don't envy you for having to deal with that. But I guess my question is, and perhaps maybe for Mr. Earl as well, is there a way, considering, let's address the elephant in the room, there's substantial change at the council table, rather than you have to sort of do it on this slow moving process, every decision leading to more input that can lead to a different decision the next time. Can we expedite that information sharing somehow? Maybe a workshop on the OCP and what council's beliefs are around it. I think just to make, well, frankly, your job a little easier. You shouldn't have to spend that time, I think, trying to interpret what we may or may not react to. And if we can provide you better guidance, then, frankly, I would love to find a way to do that.
Your worship,
Mr. Earl?
administration are happy to pull together a workshop around just the OCP interpretation topic, or the primary topic of how an application moves through our various.
Both. Well, perhaps both. I think there's interest on both counts. Yeah.
Yeah, and we will be bringing our land use procedure bylaws. I think a workshop in advance of having drafted new process would probably be beneficial, so that we want to enact a bylaw that is yours, that it really influences the process in a way that you feel like it's delivering your vision. So I think timely, because we're working on an amending procedure.
Thank you.
Yasmin, just thank you for taking the initiative to listen and to address this. I'm very impressed with that, actually. Thank you.
No.
Please proceed.
Yes, so I will turn it over to Mari for successes.
Thank you and good evening. The Development Services Department improved or sustained application processing times by reinforcing teamwork and interdepartmental collaboration. And this was despite multiple vacancies and staff transitions in key roles, including the times required for onboarding of new staff. We championed interdepartmental collaboration with engineering, building and bylaw, communications, and community planning. We increase understanding and buy-in of site adaptive planning and design principles among city staff outside of the Development Services Department. And we developed processes to support the configuration of Tempest, and concurrently developed department process manuals for each application type to support onboarding of staff, clarifying role and expectations.
Because some of the challenges and opportunities are similar, and we're building onto those successes. So the staff transitions and vacancies were definitely a challenge, but also gave us an opportunity to restructure the department and place a greater focus on team strengths, and potentially build a team that had strengths that are progressively building up. So strengthening the core competencies and the different tiers of skill set that a planning department requires. We also are, some of the challenges and the opportunity is in our continuous ongoing exploration of what site adaptive planning means, and how different sites, some of them have a riparian component and some of them is a steeply sloped hillside context, and site adaptive speaks to a very fluid and site-specific response to the topography and the environmental assets of those lands. So it is resource intensive, and a lot of conversations with staff internally to agree to an approach and next steps, and how to engage with applicants to explain the detail understanding of the site that is required even before going into a rezoning process. So we've also, I would say that the review of each file is increasing in complexity, just because our community planning team, and they will speak to this in a little while, They have been busy developing and building policies and expectations around heritage, around climate change, various other expectations and policies of council and the community. Integrating those into our review process has added time. It delivers a better product, but it is part of those challenges and opportunities to continue to deliver a good review that looks at the policy that has been coming to us from the community planning team. And lastly, and following on to that same theme, implementing our new parking bylaw has taken a little bit of time to educate our developers, some of them quite established, as to the new requirements that are expectations of bike parking and electrification of bike areas, etc. So it's been a little bit of an education process to educate our developers onto the new policies and expectations that are being developed actively by our community planning team under the direction of council. So that's so my priorities, the priorities of the department, is to continue to support the amendments to the community amenity contribution and the attainable housing policies, as well as the development of additional policies that the community planning team leads. So we support their work as a stakeholder and partner in many of those endeavors. Similarly, we would be wanting to look at an update to our land use application procedure bylaw that will be coming forward to you. I believe it's scheduled for the end of February, February or beginning of March is on the near-term agenda. We had created the small lot design guidelines, so that step has been completed, and we have maintained our development application processing time as we shown in our data tables. We are almost completing our development application forms and the update to the fees that is coming forward under Jen's direction sometime in February as well. And we are supporting the implementation of Tempest, our land development software system. We're supporting engineering and creating policies relative to small infill subdivisions that will probably come after the subdivision servicing bylaw, and all the work that engineering is doing to kind of get their bylaw sorted out, and then we'll move into the development of guidelines for that small lot infill. And then we are actively implementing the Parks and Recreation Master Plan through rezoning and subdivision, and supporting the building department as they review and engage with the Royal BC Museum and their initiatives. And we have currently deferred specific changes to the report regarding options on enhanced design quality for development projects that currently is deferred. Some of our priorities going into 2023 is actively looking to fill the job vacancies and ensuring that the delivery of the current service level is achieved without staff burned out. We will continue to support and implement Tempest and increase training, integration, and the use of the program through other modules. And functionalities like GIS, the public interface with a website, that would be very important for us to have that, and business licenses and calls for services. So there's a lot of capacity for Tempest to do and facilitate the sharing of information with the public, but we gotta get implemented and then progressively take on a few more of the enhanced functionalities. And then we are looking forward to co-leading the development of improved design guidelines with the community planning team, so that we can look at this OCP review process and enhance the wording and the usability of the design guidelines for each development permit area.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Oh, Councillor Day.
Thank you. When I don't see in here anywhere where we're comparing ourselves to other regions or looking at you know, planning is kind of a forward-looking department, and then engineering kind of takes over with the reality after the fact. And are we looking somewhere at whether or not what we did achieved what we anticipated? So I'm just looking to find, you know, how do we kind of close that loop? You know, there's many communities in British Columbia, they all have to have, you know, well, they don't have to have, but many have similar bylaws that they choose to have to address different issues, tree bylaws, you know, repairing areas, planning, different. So where in our plan do we find that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's a conversation that Ian and myself often have about how do we evaluate or provide metrics of success, or how do we measure how closer are we moving towards the objective. So I know that through a lot of the work that the community planning team is doing, including the development of the urban forest strategy, there's some measurement there about our tree canopy and kind of where we are at, where we were 10 years ago, and what we need to do better or achieve a target. And I believe that research and that insight is coming to you at some point this year. I think at this point, we're doing it very much on a project by project basis, kind of when we tackle urban forests, when we tackle housing, then we have a housing needs assessment then. But it is a good point that it would be nice to have a comprehensive dashboard to have a look at.
Yeah, to be able to look at really whether or not we've been able to achieve what we were trying to achieve, and you know what we might need to do differently. The other issue that I'm a little bit worried about is that of soil conditions. So we've had projects come forward in the past that have actually not materialized due to soil conditions, and is there work that we need to identify? Is it in the plan, or do we need to add it to our plan?
Yeah, I would say increasingly we're becoming aware of the type of reporting and preliminary assessments that we could require at rezoning to better understand whether 4 levels of underground parking or 7 levels or 2 levels or 1 are actually feasible and realistic for some of the locations in the city. So there is reporting that we require when we do have a general understanding of the soil conditions in some areas, and we do have certain good understanding of the active sites throughout our community where we do need to do that due diligence. Yeah, we can look as part of the OCP review at our hazard lands development permit guidelines to ensure that we always have in their requirements for geotechnical investigations. We are increasingly doing more hydrogeology reporting. So not just the geotechnical concerns, but the hydrogeology of sites. So we can probably strengthen that conversation.
Great, thank you. And there's just one last, sorry, I have a tickle that just won't go away. I've lost my thought. I'll let someone else carry on.
Please, Mr. Earl. Thank you very much. I just have one question. It's not just for you to answer, I don't think. One of the common themes I'm starting to hear over and over and over, I mean, it is an important part of how we do business is Tempest and Tempest integration. Is there, this is the one thing I'd like to know, is there sort of a, do we have like a project schedule to sort of say, this is when we want to have this all implemented, how many people we have to train? So we're tracking all that. So we have a definitive date so that we're not talking about Tempest as being a challenge 4 years from now. So is there something that exists like that, Mr. Earl?
Administration will return with a chart that you're describing right now, both
Okay.
in terms of what our original expectations were
Okay.
and what our new expectations are, and then the thresholds of the various modules. And so how council will begin to see things differently, and then ultimately the community.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. We'll continue on. Jen, I guess it's over to you.
Thank you very much. So with respect to the development services operating budget, you've heard a couple of times now, we will be returning with proposed fee increases in this area as well. Overall, we are anticipating that the draft budget, just shy of $290,000, is indicative of what we can anticipate collection on with these revised fee estimates. Preliminary discussions for this year, we are thinking a possible slowdown in the volume this year and then returning in future years. This area does receive an internal allocation of 15% of our projected building permit revenue. Again, related functions. You've heard about how those teams are interdependent and work together to support the building and development activity of the city. And so that funding is also reflected and supports the resourcing needed in this area. When we move into core operating expenses for this area, the majority of the budget is to support the staffing resources that are outlined in the service plan before you. You've heard about the challenges with vacancies. That's the primary driver for the projected actuals coming in where they are. And then when we move forward and have a look at how the draft budget compares to what's been approved for 23, that decrease of 4% is a result of the restructure that has been discussed tonight. Beyond that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Council. Nope. Over to you, Mr. Earl.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we're looking for council to approve the draft 23 priorities, and thankfully in this instance, there is 3. And the proposed level of service at maintain.
Okay. Can I get a motion to maintain? Grove and second Jensen. All in favor? Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. We'll proceed on.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Community Planning Department is dedicated to the achievement of municipal goals through the development of planning policy and the provision of council with advice on a wide range of issues. Community planning generally fits within 5 functional areas, which include long-range planning and policy, heritage planning and conservation, arts, culture and recreation, environmental sustainability, and economic prosperity. Community planning coordinates area planning initiatives and updates to the official community plan and other major bylaws, such as our land use bylaw. And the next 5-year review of the OCP is scheduled for 2023. I won't get into the details of each area. They're listed on the next page. I'm confident Mr. Borhill would be happy to answer any of the specifics, but I will now turn to council expectations. Monitor community need for policy review and generation. Review and monitor official community plan for potential policy development. Focus on infrastructure planning for active transportation mode shift and the waterfront public realm. Anticipate population changes and consequential policy impacts. Monitor development of commercial and industrial development relative to residential to ensure balance is maintained. Strengthen protection of built heritage. Create opportunities to celebrate and promote intangible heritage. Understand and support community need for recreation, arts, and cultural programming and facilities. Implement actions relative to the declared climate emergency and establish economic development environment. Administration are seeking council's amendments.
Councillor Day?
Thank you. The point that starts with monitor development of commercial and industrial development relative to residential to ensure balance is maintained. I think that most of us around the table might agree that we need more commercial and industrial than we currently have. And so I'd like to amend that to ensure that the balance is appropriate rather than be maintained.
Good point. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Councillor Day. I guess I'll just have one question, and I don't know where it's addressed. I don't know if it's understand and support community need for recreation, arts, culture, and programming and facilities. It's just that, you know, understanding we've got all the data now that's coming in, you're getting all the demographics, you're seeing the growth patterns, and it's looking out and sort of saying forecasting, you know, for a community of this size with this demographics, we're going to need more community amenities. Like what I'm talking about is soccer fields and lacrosse boxes and maybe ice rinks, swimming, whatever. It's not really captured here anywhere, really, is it? It's that plan. It's that overall, this is what we're going to need if we follow this data right now. And I just don't see that. You know, there's no wish list that we can go to and start thinking ourselves, you know, we're going to have to start thinking about putting money away for these type of amenities. And not to the best of my knowledge, they're in different little things that I've seen, but there's no one place that captures it all. And it's done knowing what our demographics are going to be like. I guess there's that I don't see the tie-in right now. So maybe you can explain it to me, Mr. Borio.
Your worship.
Yes, please, Mr. Earl.
Might I recommend an amendment to understand and support community need for recreation, arts, and cultural program to include and establish master plans for?
Oh, I love that. Myself personally. Council agree? Okay. Perfect. On that note, oh, Councillor Day, you want another turn?
Yeah, I've thought of another, because I was looking at the second from the last point about the climate emergency to implement actions related to the declared climate emergency. So up until now, I think we've been trying to, you know, follow the trends and identify best practices, improve transportation, look at ride sharing, try to get more people walking, cycling, taking transit. But what we haven't looked at in quite some time is some of the benchmarks that we might want to look at in the face of this climate emergency, including the permeability of our surfaces and the I won't even get into the detail, but I think that that whole area has a very small profile here, and it's something that's really important for the future of our communities. So we need to identify and monitor benchmarks in our community. Or I don't know whether benchmarks or data points, but somehow we have to start measuring and retaining that information year over year.
Your worship, might I recommend a separate bullet underneath the climate action bullet that speaks to that point?
Sure. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Okay, seeing no more questions, Mr. Earl, if you want to continue.
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff history and forecast. You can see some variation in 22, 23, and 24 with positions that are grant funded. We've got some performance measures and key stats relative to transit onboarding, housing starts as a percentage of the amount defined by our housing needs assessment, which was 264 per year. And then we've got an affordability metric looking at the differences between this most recent census in 2021 and the 2016 relative to tenants paying more than 30% or households paying more than 30% on shelter costs. And you can see some change over time there. I'll turn it over to the team at this point to address council relative successes and challenges.
Thank you, Mr. Earl. So maybe start off by talking a little bit about the metrics that we're now compiling as part of the preparations for 2023 official community plan review. So this is an exciting time in planners' lives when we get a chance. It's an expectation every 5 years and we open up the fundamental planning document for the city. And a big part of that is to try to assess for council exactly how we've done over the last 5 years. So there are several metrics included in the existing OCP in terms of modal shift, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and other more qualitative aspirations. We're trying to take that and then add as much as we can in terms of new census data that we're getting more and more as releases come from the 2021 census, as well as from other sources such as the CRD, who is updating a really important study for Colwood, which is the origin destination study that looks at how people travel around the region. That being said, happy to answer any more questions about metrics, but we do agree that it's a really fundamental thing for us to get our heads around right now. So we're going to try to be as concise as possible, and we're going to be taking a subset of the successes and priorities. So if there's any that we skip, please stop us and we can elaborate. So starting with the successes in 2022, we completed our off-street parking bylaw project, and some of you on council will know that was something that was a long time coming. So we're really excited to complete that one. We also led the compilation of the draft Colwood Active Transportation Network Plan. So I'm excited to say that's on the agenda for Monday night, and happy to see that almost completed. Next, I'll pass over to Ms. Collins.
So the next success we're going to touch on is regarding the implementation of the Parks and Rec Master Plan through the continued development of park-specific plans. Collier Creek, Lookout Lake, and Ocean View Park have been completed. Havenwood and Latoria, you received it just last week. There's 2 others that are nested within the Waterfront Stewardship Plan, and this is part of a larger body of work from 2021 to 2025, in which 10 individual park management plans will be completed.
Thanks, Jill. So we also developed the low carbon resiliency plan, which council saw earlier. We are now collecting public input on that and hope to come back in February with a final draft. We also updated our population development projections report that Colliers assisted us with. And then we're back to Jill here.
So similar to the low carbon resiliency plan, the draft Triangle Lands and Gateway Vision Action Plan was before council in the summer. Since that time, we've taken it out for public consultation. And so the intention of that is to look at a series of parcels fronting onto the Sioux Road Island Highway corridor, as well as the Triangle Lands encapsulated by Whale Road, Goldstream Avenue, and Sioux Road. So the intent of that work is to develop a 30 to 50-year vision, look at more detailed land use and master plan concepts, and explore how that could be implemented through various partnerships. That will be back in front of you later this quarter.
Thanks, and we're excited to say that the first private sector partner that wants to move forward with implementing that plan is also going to be bringing forward their proposal at the same meeting. So we've also completed a first draft of the Colwood Heritage Strategy. So council hasn't seen that yet because the draft that was prepared went to our Heritage Commission. We received feedback from the commission that suggested we need to re-engage with some stakeholder groups, particularly Indigenous stakeholders. And since then, we've done some great work with the Esquimalt Nation, making 2 presentations to Chief and Council. And we have their blessing to go ahead with interviews with community members. So we're working on that now. So we're working on that. It's slow going, but we want to get it right. And we hope later in this quarter to bring back results. So we are now at, so we've completed our first natural assets inventory and final report. So that is a document that's assisting us with now later projects, including ecosystem restoration work in partnership with Parks Canada that we'll talk more about later, as well as our forestry study that's looking at our urban forest canopy. Want to take the next one?
So in February of 2022, we also updated our community amenity contributions policy to an interim measure. So before that, it had not been updated from 2009, and our rates were approximately 200% lower than regional comparables. That has now been corrected, and we are more on par with our regional like-minded municipalities. Additionally, last year in 2022, we also completed an omnibus update of the official community plan. The update addressed completed policy work, improved implementation clarity, and added housing supply figures to complement key areas of local need.
Thanks. So the next one on our list is we initiated a First Nations protocol development project and facilitated community engagement with Esquimalt Nation. We're making inroads with other local First Nations, including Songhees and Chanu First Nations. I should mention that Desiree Gibbons from our development services team is project managing this, and she's doing an amazing job, and really happy to have her assisting with this project.
We've also provided the coordination on the municipal incentive top-up program for energy retrofits in partnership with the provincial government, and provided GHG inventory reporting. So with the Clean BC, Better Homes BC renovation and rebate program, the city has provided $35,000 in rebates for Colliers residents to reduce their emissions by way of switching to high efficiency heating equipment and or providing building envelope improvements. So funding for participation has come via climate action funding allocated through the province. And we received that as a result of our emissions reporting to the province.
Next up, we've got our new antenna system siting policy. So that policy is now in place, and we have conversations ongoing with third parties looking at improving telecommunications service in Southern Colwood.
So next up is we've facilitated a Sioux School District collaboration agreement implementation via the Dunsmuir Multi-Sport Court project. So in 2021, the MOU between us and the school district was signed. It outlines a commitment to work together to achieve local and community benefit on various projects of mutual interest. Via budget last year, monies were allocated for the Dunsmuir project, and to date, the old tennis court at the middle school site has been removed. Initial site prep has occurred, and the joint use and contribution agreements are underway with work to be targeted later this spring.
And lastly, and certainly not least, are the is the success the city's had in grant applications in the last couple of years. So our department supports coordination of this function, but very much work with the different teams that the grants would support. I'm really excited to say that we've got over 14.5 million in grant applications in play right now. If we were successful in all of them, I don't expect we will be, but in a perfect world, that would equate to just over $760 per resident of Galway. And just for reference, in the previous year, we received $5.3 million total in grant funding from this work, which equates to $276 per resident. So on to challenges and opportunities.
Just if we can just pause for 1 second, just some questions here. Council Ward?
I don't have a question, but I think it's strangely appropriate that my dog is the one photographed next to challenges and opportunities. Thank you for that.
Councilor Day. We needed some levity.
So I was just looking at the for the housing affordability and prosperity. Are you capturing strata fees in your considerations for affordability? Because that's something that I notice a great deal in my day job, which is the high variability. I've seen strata fees, probably the cheapest are like $300 a month. Some of them are like $750 a month. And that is something that a lot of people are maybe not thinking about when they look at the affordability of a property that they're looking into. And it's something that sort of kind of got pushed out of the municipal sphere for looking at. But I think it's important to somehow capture, monitor, note somewhere, because it's something that as budgets get tighter, our residents are going to need to look at and think about.
Thank you very much, Councilor Day. Oh, God, please go ahead, Mr. Barlow.
And thank you, Your Worship. And just to note that part of the survey that the federal government undertakes to determine core housing need and affordability metrics includes costs of housing, including strata fees. So when we're looking at statistics provided by the federal government, it is intended to capture those costs. So thank you. On to challenges and opportunities. So once again, I'm going to try to take the highlights here to save some time, and please ask me to recap if there's any that I don't speak to that you'd like to hear more from. So we have some massive opportunities and work with partners such as Parks Canada on the National Urban Park Project. We also have significant funding, as council's aware, through Public Safety Canada's Building Safer Communities Fund. So we're getting very close to being able to sign a contribution agreement with local service providers so we can get that money working. And there's a lot of work right now being done on behalf of the team to make that happen. So excited about that. One of the challenges we're facing right now is a tight labor market, which affects availability of professionals, both in terms of expanding our team internally, as well as attaining expertise through consulting contracts. We're finding some specific high demand contractors really difficult to schedule these days. Heritage planning being one of the key ones. A huge opportunity for us is our new GIS capabilities that are coming online. I'm lucky to have Mr. Goebel as a neighbor, and he gets to hear me fantasize about the future 3D models of the city and the different really interesting things I think we're going to be able to do with that new capacity. So lastly, another challenge is for us to maintain workflow with projects while at the same time meeting the needs of different committees, both internal and external. A lot of the different timelines that we're trying to mesh with often create timing challenges with our projects, but we try our best to meet the needs of the committees as we work through those projects. I'll pause there for any questions.
Any questions, Council? Councillor Day?
Thank you. Just on the challenge with the internal and external committees, is there anything that council could facilitate to make that smoother for you?
Thank you for that question, and through the mayor. I love a good meeting. I think we've been well served by the committees that the city is hosted here in Colwood. I think we have to think about that. I think it's an excellent question, and it would behoove me to talk to the larger team to understand how that could potentially happen. There's probably perspectives at the administrative level that could be leveraged as well, that could provide some feedback on that. So certainly happy to return.
Yeah, that I'm sure that all of council would be interested in hearing about potential, you know, what are the roadblocks? So if we know about them, maybe we can try to help avoid them.
And I should qualify that really it's a reality of life in terms of needing to manage a project that's feeding information to a body that's meeting every quarter or every month. You know, it inherently creates some roadblocks that we can't avoid in some cases. So.
Thank you.
This may be a good place, Mr. Earl, to bring up this subject, because I was looking ahead of when we can cover. It's more or less a budget discussion, but it's also, it's sort of tied with service level in a way, I guess. And that to me is all the external commitments that we have as a city right now. And we never ever seem to put anything to bed. And what I mean, and it's not staff, it's council's fault actually. And you know what I'm talking about is, you know, way back when a council before had recommended that we get out of, you know, for example, the Greater Victoria Labor Relations. And then this council, and then the last council said, well, let's just trial it for a year. And we never got down to discussing it and making it this hardcore decision one way or the other. Another example, SIP, South Island Prosperity Partnership. That's another one. And I don't know what other committees that we have external like that. It's like almost like I'd like to have a list of these things, because I think if I want to target anything, that's the first thing I would like to look at. And I don't know, you know, because you just brought that up, Mr. Borhill, you know, I thought there's some place that we have to talk about this. And we haven't talked about it. And I'd like to put it to bed, you know, like get closure on some of these things, because we just seem to sit in abeyance because no one wants to make the ugly decision, I guess. I don't know what it is, but I'd like to get closure on it one way or the other. You know, do we continue or do we stay on? Let's just make the decision. And if we make that decision to stay on whatever, then we're fully committed. But, you know, so I don't know where the best place to put this is, Mr. Earl. So I'm asking for your advice on this.
Thank you, Your Worship. The two particular ones that you referenced, there's already direction in the service review for the teams most closely responsible to return to council to have that specific conversation about whether service delivery through that mechanism continues to make sense. On the broader question, however, and perhaps tying into Councillor Day's previous question, from my perspective, it's a process like strategic planning where council establishes your perspective on currently what are the biggest gaps that you would like to fill? Where do you want the team to focus? And so, as Mr. Borhill was indicating, some of our struggles are there's only so much time for the team. There's a very long list of priorities. And how does the team try to determine if if one needs to give, which one needs to be on top? And so administration would very much rely upon council's new strategic plan to give us advice as to which functions are more important to council and or which gaps do we need to pay the most attention to. Notwithstanding, we have a long list and everything on the list is important, but if it was put in a priority order and strategic planning helps to do that, it helps us focus.
Okay, I hear you. I guess I was more, my issue was I was more concerned that because there's so many new faces around the table for them to all understand where we're starting from, what's the baseline, so they can make those decisions and we can have those discussions. And because even sometimes I go, oh, we're part of that. I even learned some new things too. So I think that's an important aspect of this. Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Jensen, I have not ignored you.
In 10 minutes. No, just kidding. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Interesting discussion, and we've batted those two around particularly over the last few years. And I mean, I dare say you're not wrong. My only concern is if we kick this down the road to strategic planning, where does that fit in with the budget year if we've decided to change our tune a little bit? Does it all fit together nicely? And it'll be, if we take a decision to abandon one of these, it's not too late by the time we get to strategic planning as far as the budget goes.
With the two that have been mentioned thus far, there's a lead time. Should we signal a change in approach? Right. That strategic planning would create plenty of room for.
As I recall that we put forward another couple of years with SIP the last time this came to us, so we might have a bit of some time ahead of us, some time to play with this. But thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We shall proceed, please.
Thank you, Worship. So I believe now we're on to our 2022 priorities. So one of the big ones, as I've already mentioned, was the finalization of the Colliers Heritage Strategy. So we're close to the finish line, but there's some important work to get that one completed, as I mentioned earlier. But we're confident that this year we will be able to deliver the final draft to council. We also have a continuing work on our economic development, economic prosperity work stream. So this was an important priority in 2022. It remains as one of our core service areas. However, we don't have a dedicated staff person for that function at this point. The work in that area would be shared amongst the existing staff moving forward. We also had the priority to lobby BC Transit for public transit improvements. So we have had some productive meetings with management at BC Transit last year. And we also prepared a presentation to go to the Transit Commission. It was decided due to timing considerations ahead of the election that we would present that to the new transit board post elections, and that should be happening quite soon, actually.
So another 2022 priority was to look to update the land use bylaw by applying the results of what we heard from the Whale Road and Triangle Lands visioning process. That is in progress.
And then back the active transportation network plan that we can get into on a deep level on Monday. Also complete the coastal adaptation plan and review the inland flood hazard. So this is a really important project that is related to the work that we're doing with Associate Engineering to address council's request to provide validation of the waterfront stewardship plan related to sea level rise and climate change. So that work is nearing completion, and we hope to bring back the waterfront stewardship plan and the projections for its resilience to sea level rise and climate change related storm activity Once that's complete, we hope to then move forward to a coastal adaptation plan that would shift to the protecting private property once we have our house in order with approaches to our park space. We also hope to develop floodplain maps for inland areas of Colwood, in addition to our coastal areas. That work is been deferred until we have the outcomes of our drainage study that's underway right now, looking at how flows from Triangle Mountain can be better managed.
In 2022 as well, a priority was to work with Wanda Fuca, Performing Arts Center Society, or JDF PACS, to advance the concept of a performing arts facility via the West Shore Community Arts and Culture Center study. So a terms of reference endorsed by council guided that scope of work, and the final report is forthcoming.
So another objective for 2022 was to complete the low carbon resiliency plan and GHG inventory and mitigation. So as you're aware, that is nearing completion.
And 2022 also saw the beginning of the development of a new comprehensive public art strategy. The policy is intended to assist in defining future direction, philosophy, policy, priority, and actions for the city of Colwood pertaining to public art. The forthcoming body of work is largely intended to provide a foundation for effective development, management, and stewardship of a public art and public art process for the city of Colwood.
So we'll pause there before 2023 priorities.
Councillor Day?
Thank you. On your draft 23 priorities, you have that you completed the Colwood Heritage Registry. Is there a new priority there for 2023, or is it complete?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Day, and through the mayor. That is a typo. The ED at the end of complete should be deleted. Thank you.
Councillor Grove.
Oh, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The again, about the heritage strategy, does that include the built heritage and maintenance of it, the St. John's Divine Church and Emery Hall, that kind of thing? Just clarify that for me, quick. I mean, sorry.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Grove, and through the mayor. Yes, it is very much a high level document in terms of its proposed policy approaches to built heritage. It wouldn't, as in its current form, get into details for those properties. There is an existing heritage conservation bylaw that applies to that site. We would look to that document as being the appropriate place to enshrine specifics on that site. However, there would be broad-based policy that would affect the overall management.
Okay, so that would include like the whole maintenance and ongoing would be in the.
So apologies, could you repeat the question?
Like the ongoing maintenance of those structures and so on would be part of this plan or part of something that's dealt with by parks or?
No, in its current form, that would be a level that would be below the policy and the heritage strategy, but happy to take feedback from council when we do bring it forward. And
yeah, thank you very much.
Over to you, Mr. Borhill.
So we're on to our 2023 priorities. So a big one for us is to complete our new parks improvement and acquisition development cost charge program. So that's well underway, and we're looking to return to council this quarter. Probably Q2 of this year, but not too far into the future. Also coordination, as we've already mentioned, of a 5-year review of the Fish Committee plan. So we have $100,000 budgeted in this year's budget to do that work. That budget was created based on an understanding of what we thought would be appropriate for a 5-year review. Considering the 2018 official plan was a major overhaul of the previous plan. And if council wants us to articulate what that budget would cover in terms of consulting support and scope of works, we can do that. As Ms. Collinson also already mentioned, the Colwood Corners visioning, that's the properly called the Triangle Lands, the Gateway and Triangle Lands Visioning and Action Plan that's coming forward hopefully in February. And then also we're reviewing and updating the affordable housing policy. So we're looking at that as being a key outcome of our work with the Social Planning Council. We have our next workshop that we're hoping to invite both Colliers Council as the host and regional councils to in March. That would be the next step in that project. We also have continued support of their mode shift approaches. So that's talking about the active transportation work that we're doing, as well as the encouragement of people taking more sustainable forms of transit. We're continuing to support our collaboration with local First Nations on the protocol development work, which we designed as a 2-year project beginning in 2022. We've hired a consultant and are now, as I said, building connections with Songhees and Chanu on top of the good work that's already been done with the Esquimalt Nation. We're hoping to complete the coastal adaptation plan and inland floodplain analysis, as already been mentioned, as well as the Colliers Heritage Registry. So it's important to make a distinction between the heritage strategy and our registry. So the previous council gave direction that once a strategy was in place, that really gave direction to where the resources should go for heritage conservation, to then create a registry. So that would take what is now a list, our inventory, and take it the next step up to a registry that gives not legal designation, but a higher level of recognition of the heritage resources that are inherent in those properties. We also have, as Ms. Collinson mentioned, options for a new public art policy coming forward soon as a priority. And then also, this is quite critical, implementation of low carbon resiliency plan later this year. And then lastly, continuation of our work with BC Transit and some of the really interesting outcomes of our recent discussions around rapid bus implementation, as well as a new transit route that would provide connection between Colwell Corners and Fort Rod Hill. So that's an interesting project that Nafisa is working on and is going to get to at the end here. And then so lastly on this list, we've got to continue to build connections with Colliers businesses and the development community through the Economic Prosperity Roundtable. So that is now a biannual meeting that we are proposing to continue as a priority in 2023. And I know this isn't on the list, but I wanted to give Nafisa a chance to correct an oversight on my part in terms of not having our National Urban Park as a priority for 2023.
Oh, you shut it off.
Hello, everybody, and thank you. As I brought it to the council last week, we are excited to move forward with the National Urban Parks project. We have 3 key activities of ecosystem regeneration strategy, active transportation and public transit pre-feasibility studies, and the engagement process strategy. We already talked to some of the developers, and we are talking to Parks Canada and moving forward with the project.
Thank you very much. Councillor D.
Thank you. I'm sorry, it was a few minutes ago you spoke to, I believe it was the Triangle Lands visioning process, or maybe it was the Colwell Corners visioning process, and that you would be inviting regional councils to the table. Could you explain that, please?
Thank you for that question. Apologies if I went a little fast there. So my reference to the meeting that's being planned is the regional affordable housing poverty reduction project that we're doing with the Social Planning Council. Okay. So that's a project that is funded through a grant from the province that we received last year, and the work is ongoing through 2023. Part of the the deliverables are a series of workshops for councils and key staff. So the Colwood is partnered with Saanich and Victoria as the group that was the main audience for those workshops. We made the decision based on the interest in the region that we would open it up to other municipalities, as was the case with the meeting late last year at University of Victoria that some of COA Council were able to attend. We're hoping that this next workshop can dig down a little bit deeper into the issues around affordable housing and help council adjudicate the options that we'll bring forward for updates to our policy.
Okay, are just curious, are we talking about affordable or attainable home ownership? Or are we talking about affordable or attainable rental? Or both?
Thank you for that question, through the mayor. Certainly both. You know, right now we're looking at improving the spectrum of housing and its attainability by our residents and future residents.
Great. Yeah, I think there's, I certainly have had my eyes opened in recent years for a number of the more, well, attainable rental housing that's available within our region is often owned outside of our region. Vancouver, Toronto companies are putting up some of these large buildings that exist. And there are a number of community issues resulting from the way those buildings may be managed. So I just think it's important that we bring all voices to the table that we can.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question, Ian. We released the visioning, the triangle visioning thing just before the election. And also I was CC'd on one, which was a response from the mayor of View Royal, and it wasn't nice. And I don't know where other feedback we got from the other mayors at all. So, but now basically there's a new election, there's new councils everywhere. How do we plan on tackling that now? Are we gonna send it back out, or is there expectation for me to pick up the phone? And I meet with these with the West Shore mayors every 6 weeks. We have lunch together. I was going to broach the subject then to let them know, just in case you don't know, you may want to rattle the chains with your CAOs about our plan, draft plan being out there right now. It was released, and you know, so it is public. But so so how do we gonna handle this right now? I could just tell you that I did talk with 2 of the mayors yesterday, West Shore mayors, and they had sort of the same reaction actually. Anyways, so is there a recommended action in what we're going to be doing here?
Thank you for that. Yes, it would behoove us to make sure that the new members of our councils that participate in the West Shore Parks and Rec Board are aware of our plan. So when we went forward to the West Shore Board last year, it was clear that this project would require a check-in with the next board. So that was an expectation that we planned for. With respect to the referrals to other joint adjacent municipalities and their councils, we'll be providing a summary of the feedback that we've received to date to council. Certainly, if there's any help that yourself, your worship, or council can give us in spreading the message to other members of adjacent councils, that's fantastic. We can also take feedback and direction from council if a re-referral is felt to be warranted. However, we really think that the key feedback that we need to hear is from those other owner members of West Shore Parks and Rec, because the plan does include a property that is co-owned.
Correct. Correct. Okay, thank you. And Jen.
Thank you, Your Worship. So you've heard both earlier this month and last month about some exciting grant opportunities and relatively new initiatives within this area. So we have introduced with this operating budget, with this draft financial plan, additional staffing resources to support those initiatives, both with respect to the urban parks planning and as well as with respect to the implementation of the low carbon resiliency plan. So this budget has been updated to reflect that funding. And as well, that's the primary driver for the increase in the core operating expenditure budget for community planning. Heard some conversation tonight pertaining to the city's economic development, both our spend and our existing commitments. So that budget there, just shy of $50,000, that primarily represents our membership in 3 organizations. So the South Island Prosperity Partnership, most recent council resolution was 2 years, 2021 and 2022, with an optional 3rd year renewal for 2023. And we are required to give 12 months notice for withdrawal. In addition, member of the West Shore Chamber of Commerce and a member of the Greater Victoria Chamber. Library, our library requisition is included within this service area as well. So we are requisitioned, we are a member of the Greater Victoria Public Library, and specifically we are responsible for maintenance costs for our proportional share of the Wanda Fuca branch here in Colwood. This requisition is split 50-50 between our proportional assessment value and then 50% of our proportional population. The draft 2023 requisition has increased overall 5.95%. Our share has increased closer to 10%. I did want to mention in recent years, we have not asked representatives of GVPL to come and speak to council. If that is something that this council is desirous of, it would be helpful to hear that tonight, and I can look to arrange that for during budget deliberations. And then lastly, we do maintain some funding both for our heritage related works as well as the city's culture. Recent years, we've introduced a grant program that's funded within this area. With that, I'll pause. Please to answer any questions you may have.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just was going to say I don't know how others feel, but I would very much like to hear from the library board. I think that it's a core and important service. And even though, I may not have any big issues to bring to the table, I think it's important because when they come to council, not only council hears, but our public hears what's going on there. And as an important service in our municipality, we need to stay live to that.
I agree. But there's no issue there. And they're mobile and they can move just like that. So they jump around all the municipalities right now. So no biggie on their side, that's for sure. Any others? Nothing. I don't see anything. Mr. Earl, to the recommendation.
Thank you, Your Worship. Working recommendation on the 23 priorities and a maintained service level. And as disclosed at the previous session, we will return once we have the final document with the top 3 of these priorities isolated differently.
Excellent, thank you. Someone want to move the recommendation? Councillor Ward, seconder. Councillor Jensen. Any opposed? Seeing none, unanimous, approved. And motion to adjourn. Thank you very much, Councillor Day.
Thank you.
Thank